The night my aunt locked me out of the house, it was minus 17 degrees in Winnipeg. I remember checking my phone before I left the car, 11:42 p.m. The kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin but goes straight through it, finds your bones, and stays there. I had my coat, barely. I had my purse with $7 and a debit card I wasn't sure still worked. And I had the sound of my aunt laughing behind me as the deadbolt clicked into place on the other side of the door. "Let's see how long she lasts," she said to my cousin. I heard it clearly through the window. They weren't even trying to be quiet about it. I stood on that front step for probably 30 seconds before I understood that no one was going to open the door back up. That it wasn't a joke with a quick punchline. That I was at 28 years old, standing outside in a Manitoba winter with no real plan and nowhere to go. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. I want to tell you I didn't cry. I did cry. I cried the whole walk to the Tim Hortons 3 blocks away, the tears freezing on my face before they even made it to my chin. But I made it. And I never went back. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. My mother passed away when I was 11. Breast cancer, quick and brutal. One year she was packing my school lunch and braiding my hair before Sunday church, and the next she was gone. My father had left when I was 6, not dramatically, not with a fight I can remember, just quietly absent the way some fathers are, like a chair that gets moved to another room, and eventually you stop noticing the space it left. So at 11, I went to live with my mother's younger sister, my aunt. She had a 3-bedroom house in Winnipeg's North End, a part-time job at a clothing shop on Portage Avenue, and 2 kids of her own. My cousin, who was 13, and another cousin who was 9. I want to be fair. I know she didn't have to take me in. I know that taking on someone else's child when you're already stretched thin is not a small thing. But there's a difference between someone doing you a favor and someone making sure you never forget they're doing you a favor. From the beginning, I was the extra. The overflow. Every family photo where I was slightly off to the side. Every birthday where my cake was technically part of my cousin's birthday, because it was easier that way. Every Christmas where I got 3 gifts and my cousins got 7 or 8, and when I mentioned it once, I was 12. My aunt looked at me with this very calm, very cold expression and said, "You should be grateful you have anything at all." I learned quickly. I stopped mentioning things. I kept my room clean. I did my homework. I got good grades because school felt like the one place where the rules made sense and effort actually produced results. I applied for every scholarship I could find when I was in high school. I got into the University of Manitoba for social work, which felt like the first real thing I had ever done entirely on my own. My aunt's response when I told her was, "I hope you don't expect us to help pay for it." I didn't. I never did. I worked 2 jobs through most of university, one at a grocery store on weekends, one at a campus cafe during the week. I took out student loans. I deferred 1 semester when the money got too tight. I graduated in 5 years instead of 4, but I graduated, and I stood at that convocation, in that gym, holding my degree and thought, no one gave me this. I did this. I moved into a shared apartment with 2 classmates after graduation. I got a job at a community resource center helping families navigate housing supports and emergency benefits. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was, let's say, honest. But I loved the work in a way that surprised me. I liked helping people find the door when the system had locked them out. The problem was money. My student loans were not small. My rent was manageable but not cheap. And then my car, a 2009 Civic that had been loyal past all reasonable expectation, finally died in October. The transmission giving up on a Tuesday afternoon in a Canadian Tire parking lot like it just didn't have anything left to prove. The repair estimate was more than the car was worth. I let it go. Without a car, getting to work became complicated. The bus route was fine in theory, but added nearly 90 minutes to my commute each way. And Winnipeg winters are not theoretical. By November, I was exhausted in a way that had started to feel permanent. My lease was also up in January. My roommates were both moving, one out of province, one in with her partner, and the apartment was being relisted at $400 more per month than what we were paying. I looked at the numbers. I looked at them again. I applied for 3 other places and got waitlisted on 2 and rejected on 1. And then my aunt called. She said she had a spare room. She said it made sense, just for a few months, just until I got back on my feet. She said it would be nice to have family around. I remember sitting in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, looking out the window at the snow, trying to remember the last time she had used that word, family, and meant it. I said yes. I know what you're thinking, and you're right, and I said yes anyway. I moved in on a Saturday in mid-January with a carload of boxes and a very careful plan to be as invisible and low maintenance as possible. For the first 2 weeks, it was fine. Surface level fine, the kind where everyone's being polite, and the house is quiet, and you think maybe this time will be different. My aunt had her own life. She was working more now, had a boyfriend who came around on weekends, seemed genuinely busy. My cousin still lived at home, 25 and between jobs, spending most of his time in the basement gaming. We barely crossed paths. I paid rent, a modest amount agreed on before I moved in, transferred on the first of every month without exception. I bought my own groceries. I cleaned the bathroom we shared without being asked. I was, I think, an extremely reasonable tenant. The problem started small. My aunt made a comment about how long I was in the shower, then a comment about the food I kept in the fridge and how much space it was taking. Then a comment, delivered at dinner one night, in front of her boyfriend, like it was funny, like it was a charming little anecdote, about how I'd always needed a lot of looking after, even as a kid. Her boyfriend laughed. My cousin smirked. I smiled and said nothing and went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. That was February. By March, the comments had become a pattern. She would say things in groups, always with an audience. Her boyfriend, my cousin, occasionally a friend of hers who came over on Thursday evenings. She never did it one-on-one. It was always performed. She's very sensitive, she'd say, in a tone that suggested sensitivity was a character flaw I had developed out of stubbornness. She's always been like that. She's very particular about her things. This when I mentioned that someone had used my shampoo. She thinks she's better than everyone because of that degree. I never once said anything that could have been interpreted this way. The degree comment landed in front of 4 people at a kitchen table, and I watched all 4 of them nod like she'd said something wise. I started writing things down. Not dramatically. I'm not the kind of person who keeps a diary in the literary sense, but on my phone, just logging dates and comments and what was said. I'm not sure why. Some instinct. It was her boyfriend who pushed it to the next level. He was around more often now, most weekends, sometimes weeknights too. He had opinions about everything. About how the house was kept, about what was on TV, about me. He told my aunt once, loudly enough that I could hear it from the hallway, that she was too soft with me and that I was taking advantage of her good nature. I had lived there for 8 weeks. I paid rent every month. I had taken advantage of nothing, but I heard my aunt agree with him. That was when I started looking harder for a new place. I found a basement suite, crosstown, small, not ideal, available June 1st. I paid the deposit quietly. I told no one. In the meantime, I kept my head down. The night it happened was a Saturday in early April. My aunt's boyfriend was over and so was a friend of his. I had never met this man before, didn't know his name, didn't want to. The 4 of them, her, him, his friend, and my cousin, had been drinking since the afternoon. Not heavily, but enough. The energy in the house was loud and loose and a little mean in the way that energy sometimes gets. I had been in my room most of the day. I came out around 10 p.m. to make tea and get ready for bed. My aunt was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked at me, just looked at me, this assessing look, and said, "She thinks she can just float through life and everyone will take care of her." I said quietly that I didn't think that at all, and that I would appreciate if she didn't talk about me like I wasn't in the room. The table went quiet. Her boyfriend said something under his breath. My aunt stood up straighter and said, "This is my house. I'll talk however I want." I took my tea and went back to my room. At 11:30, I heard a knock. I opened the door, and my aunt was standing there with her arms crossed, her boyfriend visible behind her at the end of the hall. She said I needed to check my attitude. She said I had been passive-aggressive all evening. She said her boyfriend felt uncomfortable in his own. She caught herself, then said, "Her house." I told her I hadn't spoken to anyone all evening. I told her I had been in my room. She said I knew what I was doing. I told her I didn't. And then she said, and I remember this so precisely because it was so deliberate, so practiced, "Maybe you need some fresh air to clear your head." I didn't understand what she meant until she was walking back down the hall, and her boyfriend was following, and my cousin had appeared from the basement, and all 3 of them were watching me, and she held the front door open and said, "Go on, cool down outside." I said I wasn't going outside. It was nearly midnight. It was April in Winnipeg, which means it was still well below zero. She said, "Then cool down in your room and stop making my guests uncomfortable." I went back in my room. 10 minutes later, she knocked again and said her boyfriend needed to use the bathroom. The main one, the one I shared, and that I should go wait outside while he did. I said the bathroom had a lock. She said she wasn't asking, and something in me, something that had been holding steady for years and years and years through all of it, the Christmas gifts and the dinner comments and the degree remark and the boyfriend and all of it, just stopped holding. I put on my coat. I put on my boots. I picked up my purse because my wallet and my phone were in it. I walked to the front door and I opened it myself and I stepped outside. And then I heard the deadbolt. I stood on that step and I heard them laughing on the other side of the door. My cousin said something, and they laughed again. My aunt said, "Let's see how long she lasts." -17. I walked down the front path, turned right, and kept walking. The Tim Hortons on Salter Street was 3 blocks away. I knew it because I walked past it every morning to the bus stop. I pushed open the door at 11:52 p.m., and the warmth hit me like something I hadn't realized I needed until I had it. That particular warmth of a coffee shop at midnight, the smell of coffee and the fryer and something baked, the overhead lighting that feels too bright and also exactly right. There was a woman behind the counter, maybe 50, heavyset with kind eyes, and the particular expression of someone who has seen everything and is not surprised by any of it. She looked at my face. I must have looked like something and said, "You okay, hon?" I said, "I've had a rough night." She poured me a coffee without me ordering it and pushed it across the counter and said, "On me." I sat in a booth by the window with that coffee and I thought about what I had and what I didn't have. I had my phone, which had about 40% battery. I had my wallet, which had a debit card, $7 in cash, and my Manitoba health card. I had my coat. I did not have a key. I did not have suddenly a place to sleep. I opened my banking app. My next pay was in 4 days. My account had $63 and some change. The deposit on the June apartment was already paid, but that didn't help me tonight. I sat there for a long time. At some point, maybe 1 a.m., I texted the only person I trusted to tell. Not a close friend from university, not a coworker, but a woman from my building who I had kept in loose touch with since I moved out, a retired nurse named. I'll just call her the woman from down the hall because she values her privacy, who had once told me if I ever needed anything to just ask. I texted, "I'm sorry to bother you, I'm having a crisis. Do you know if there are any overnight shelters or warming centers near the North End?" She called me back in 4 minutes. "Where are you?" she said. I told her. She said, "Stay there. I'm coming." She drove 20 minutes across the city at 1 a.m. in her 2015 Corolla to pick me up from that Tim Hortons. She didn't ask me a lot of questions on the drive. She just said, "You can stay in my spare room until you figure out your next step." She had a small apartment, tidy, with a cat named something I could never pronounce, and a collection of jade plants on the windowsill. She made up the spare bed with clean sheets and put a towel on the pillow and said goodnight, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to take someone in at 1:30 in the morning. I lay in that bed and I stared at the ceiling and I felt, it's hard to describe. Not safe, exactly, not yet. But like the ground was there again. Like I'd stopped falling and landed somewhere real. I slept until 9. In the morning, she made oatmeal and we sat at her kitchen table and she let me talk. I told her everything. Not just the night before, but the years before that. The childhood, the comments, the degree, the boyfriend, the deadbolt. She listened the way people listen when they're actually listening, not formulating a response, just taking it in. When I finished, she said, "You know this wasn't about you, right?" I said I was starting to understand that. She said, "People like your aunt, they need someone smaller to stand next to. It makes them feel bigger. When you stopped being small enough, you became a problem." I thought about that for a long time after. I spent 2 weeks at her place. I was not idle. I filed for an emergency transfer of my rental deposit to the June apartment and asked if I could move in early, in May, and the landlord, a reasonable man, bless him, said he could do May 15th if I covered an extra half month. I did the math. I asked my workplace if I could add a few extra hours. I called 211, which is the social services helpline in Manitoba, and asked what resources existed for women in housing instability. Turns out there were more than I knew about. A one-time emergency housing benefit through the province. A nonprofit in the Exchange District that helped with first and last month rent gaps. I had helped clients navigate these same systems at work. It turned out I was not great at asking for help for myself, but I could do it when I had to. I did not contact my aunt. She texted me on the 3rd day. The text said, "When are you coming to get your things?" Not, "Are you safe?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "What were you thinking? It was -17. You could have been hurt." Just, "When are you coming to get your things?" I replied. "Saturday afternoon." I went on a Saturday with the woman from down the hall, who insisted on coming, and I took exactly what was mine and not one thing that wasn't. My clothes, my toiletries, my laptop, the books I'd accumulated over the years, the small framed photo of my mother that I kept on my nightstand. My aunt was home. We didn't speak. She stood in the kitchen doorway watching me carry boxes and she didn't say a word and neither did I. My cousin was not home. It took 3 trips up and down the stairs. On the last trip, I stopped at the front door with the last box and I turned around and looked at her, standing there in that kitchen doorway, arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't have a speech prepared, I just said, "Thank you for the room," and I left. The basement suite on Balmoral Street was not beautiful. It had low ceilings and the window in the bedroom looked out at the base of the neighbor's fence and the kitchen had one power outlet that actually worked reliably. But it was mine. I put my mother's photo on the little shelf above the bathroom sink where I'd see it every morning. I bought a small jade plant for the window because I'd looked at that woman's collection for 2 weeks and it had started to seem like a good idea. I started sleeping properly for the first time in months. Something else happened that spring, and I want to be honest about this because I think it matters. I started going to a drop-in counseling group at a community center not far from my work. I wasn't sure I was the kind of person who did that. I didn't grow up in a family that talked about those kinds of resources as anything other than what other people needed. But I went because I was tired of being surprised by how much things had affected me, and I wanted to understand it better. It helped. That's all I'll say. It helped. By June, I was in a rhythm. Work, the bus, the basement suite, the jade plant on the window. I made friends with a woman at the center who brought homemade butter tarts every second Friday. I learned the bus schedule so well I didn't need to check it anymore. I called my old university advisor once just to talk, and she said that she was proud of me. And I had to sit with that for a moment, because I couldn't remember the last time someone said that. My aunt called me in July, not a text, an actual call, which I almost didn't answer. I did answer, because I'm still working on that. She said the summer had been busy. She said her boyfriend had moved in. She said she hoped I was doing okay. She did not apologize. I told her I was doing fine. I told her I was settled. I told her I had moved to a new place in May and it was working out well. There was a pause and then she said, "You always land on your feet, you know. Even when you were little, you always figured it out." I didn't know what to do with that for a long time. Was it a compliment? An absolution? A way of rewriting the story so that everything that happened was just me exercising my natural resilience, and her role in it was neutral? I think it was all three. I think she needed it to be. I said, I had to. We said goodbye. I haven't heard from her since. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was standing on that front step in the cold. I know that people who treat you like a burden will eventually find a way to make you feel like one, and the most dangerous thing you can do is agree with them. I spent years making myself smaller in that house, eating less space, taking fewer showers, asking for less, wanting less, celebrating less, and it didn't make her warmer, it just made me smaller. I know that the kindness of strangers is real. The woman at the Tim Hortons counter with her free coffee. The woman from down the hall with her spare room and her jade plants and her oatmeal. The landlord who let me in 2 weeks early. The counselor at the drop-in who said, in our second session, that having needs is not the same as being needy. These people owed me nothing. They gave me something anyway. I know that survival is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a series of small decisions made in the right order. Text the right person, ask the right question, show up to the appointment, make the call. And I know this, maybe most of all, leaving is not failure. For a long time, I thought the fact that I had to leave, that I couldn't make the situation work, couldn't smooth it over, couldn't find the version of myself that would finally be enough for her, meant I had lost something. But you cannot win a game that was rigged from the beginning. You can only stop playing. I stopped playing. My mother's photo is on the shelf above the bathroom sink. The jade plant is on the window. The bus comes at 7:42, and I know it without checking. I am not who she said I was. I never was.